Hello folks, I'm Country Tom and I'm here to tell you a little story about the birds and the bees. And it was a little story that that happened to me way back. So far I was just a young lad, and more years than I seem to be able to remember these days. But the world were a very different place back then. But I'd like to share this with you, and I'd like you to listen. You see, I'd reached the age of 14 and I hadn't started courting, and my mum was getting worried about me. And she says, "Dad, it's time you told him about the birds and the bees." He goes, "The birds and bees, is it?" So he sat me on his knee. And he says, "Now you remember Uncle Jack and that picnic way back when he went off into the woods with Auntie Pat? And how I chased the vicar's daughter, and what happened when I caught her?" I says, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, birds and bees does that." He says, "Now son, it's time that you got wed." I says, "I'd rather drop down dead." He says, "Well, what about old Maud from Itley Down?" I says, "Maud, not bloody likely. She's been with half the chaps in Itley." He says, "Well, you know, Itley really is quite a little town." He says, "Son, you got to get a wife. You can't go on enjoying life. Well, folk will think you're strange and start to frown." Now I says, "Look, why should I buy a book when there's a thriving London library in the town?" You see, one day I found a friend. 'Twas up by Fox's End. A little pigeon fell down by my feet. His feathers was flecked with red, and first I thought he's dead. But I bent down and I heard his little heart still beat. So I cupped him in my hands and I ran home to my mam. And she says, "Son, I'm as proud as you as I can be. You're thoughtful and you're kind and you've got a gentle mind. And that'll do a treat for your old father's tea." I says, "You shalt not touch my bird." And without another word, I ran into my room and shut the door. And I warmed him, and I bathed him, and I nursed him back to health, because you see, I'd never really had a friend before. I taught him lots of tricks, like playing dead and picking up sticks. And the village girls, well, they bought birdseed every day. There was Mabel from the stable, and there was Mary from the dairy. We even had a visit from our beauty queen. And that great big Betty Mavery, oh, she got her own aviary. She had the biggest parakeets I'd ever seen. And that little Betty Sue, she'd had a cockatoo, and that always seemed to bring a smile to her face. But Dad says to me, "You ought to let him go." And I says, "Oh, no. You just want to get some shooting practice in." But the vicar, he says, "My son, it really isn't done. And to lock up a wild thing," he says, "that's a sin." One morning when it was still, I took him up to Fox's Hill. I lost the only little friend I had that day. Not a word I said, I just kissed his little head. And I opened my hands and watched him fly away. He circled up and round and he landed on the ground, and then he took off again right up to the sky. And as I looked and I could see, he was a-flying back to me. Then he swooped and he put right in my eye. Well, I thought, that's bloody rude. I'm sure there's gratitude. And I hope they never cross a pigeon with a cow. And Dad says, "Here, there's a caper. I'll get a bit of paper." I goes, "Don't be daft. He's miles away by now." Dad says, I know you lost a friend, but it's really not the end. You'll be married and have a family of your own quite soon. Well, I never said a word, but you see, that little bird had lured 18 little ravers up to my room. So if anybody's got an old budgie or an old crow, I could put it to good use.